This is my family. I would say it's a typical family, except that it's 3 generations of victims. So this is my father, who's 85, 86, plus or minus 1. We're never really sure of his age. This is my brother, who is about 38. And this is my niece, who I'm going to try to focus on today, because she's 16 now, and she was 15 when she was arrested. Earlier I was talking to you about how the one universal thing about 15-year-olds is that they always try to look older than they are. And so this picture is really making her look older than she is. She's actually much younger and much innocent looking than what you see here. In other words, she's exactly your age now. So let me give you a little info, and then we'll talk about what I think we ought to do. I'm an Eritrean citizen. Today I come to speak to you about an average Eritrean family with an average Eritrean story. When I say average, it simply means this: there are a lot of stories that are even more worse than this, astoundingly worse than this, heartbreakingly worse than this. We're only here because we happen to speak English and because we happen to afford to fly a plane. But there are literally tens and thousands of Eritreans that are in unspeakably worse situation. And that's really what we will try to focus on today. My father, brother, and niece have been in prison since 2012. My dad was born in a little town called Keetharuth, Eritrea. It was little back then. It's probably the second largest town now, in 1928. He's 85, and this is his 4th arrest. We know very little about why he's arrested this time, although we're making conjectures based on the date he was arrested. But the last time he was arrested because he was trying to mediate the dispute between the group that came to be known as G15, which includes her heroic figure, her heroic father, and the other 11 people who have been detained and many of them presumed dead, and the so-called office of the president. So because he was an elder, and in traditional Eritrea, elder people mediate conflicts, he and other elders volunteered to mediate, and they were arrested. And he was released 2 years later. I'm not going to say much about him because if he was here, he would smack me around for speaking about him. And that's because he's a survivor. He knows how to fight the system. And I feel deep in my heart that he'll be okay at the end of the day. My brother, Hassan is his name. He was born in Asmara. He's 38. His story is that of an average 38-year-old. He was exiled and returned with my father to Eritrea in 1992. I don't know if you guys remember 1992, but 1992 in Eritrea was the equivalent of elderly Americans going on a bus trip to Vegas, because all they think of at that time is, I'm going to return a millionaire, I'm going to hit a jackpot. There was so much hope then that everybody was going to go back and reinvest in the country and make it grow. So my dad went back. My brother has been in the national service since 1995. That's 17 years of 18-month services. 17 years, followed by a year in jail. About my niece. My niece, Siham Ali Abdu, she's the daughter of Ali Abdu, the former Minister of Information. She was born on April 3rd, 1997 in Los Angeles, California, which makes her an American citizen and Eritrean citizen. One of the frustrating things about American politics is American politics at the State Department level, at the senators level, is completely unhelpful when it comes to people with dual nationality who go back to their place of birth. She was arrested when she was 15 on December 8th, which ironically is World Children's Day in Hashfarai. and then transferred to Abdu prison on December 25th, which is Christmas Day. Her mother happens to be a Christian, so that must have been a perfect Christmas present for her mother to arrest her 15-year-old daughter. Since March 12, she's moved off Abdu, but no family member knows where she's been. And since there's no explanation, the family are left to draw conjectures. And perhaps she's been hostage to ensure that her father, Ali Abdu, the foreign minister, who abandoned the regime and has sought political asylum in the West, is daily reminded that his daughter's fate is in their hands, and in this particular case, it's in the president's hands. Now, all governments have prisons. All governments claim that they are trying to secure their people. It's the normal duty of governments to imprison people considered threats to national security. The problem here is one of degrees. Eritrea is extreme by any measure. There are tens of thousands of Eritreans' family who are in an even worse shape than me. Families who have lost their only children, families separated for decades, families who do not know the whereabouts of their loved ones for decades. We're talking about no charges, no trial, no court, no right to self-defense, no right to hearing charges against you, no sentence, no family visitation. So those of you who are in the human rights activism deal with horrible governments day in and day out, but I don't think you deal with the kind of government that we have. I think if you were to send a letter to a so-called Minister of Justice, you would receive a response back. I would think if you were to send a letter to a prisoner, I don't know, 1 out of 10 times it would be delivered, maybe. But here it is a case of extremes. There are families who have endured longer and more intense pain than what we're talking about. I know a group of 20 Muslim Eritreans in Keren who were arrested in 1994. Remember, 1994 was considered the honeymoon period for Eritrea. And these were just rounded up and arrested, and they have disappeared. Nobody knows a thing about them. So the problem with Eritrea is not just lack of justice, it's lack of verdict. We're not talking about justice, but verdict. Justice is right and wrong. Verdict is you have been sentenced to serve 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Verdict is to say you have been found guilty of XYZ. Even if it's a trumped up charge, here's your verdict. We don't even have verdicts in Eritrea, much less justice. It's a rule by a mob, a rule of gangsters, really. So from where we sit, we're thinking, what do you want us to do about it? This is all terrible, but the world is full of terrible news. What can we do? So the one thing you can do is understand the nature of the regime, truly try to understand it. I don't know, some of you may have come in late, but when Maza was talking about the arrest of her mother, she speaks of the president himself calling her and saying, come on home, take care of your kids, nothing's going to happen to you. The Eritrean ambassador to the US personally assured her that nothing will happen to her if she goes home. In fact, he laughed about it. He said, who do you think we are? Why would we arrest you? You were just here attending school. We love educated people, come on down. So it's that kind of deceit and habitual lying that you should consider as part of the nature of the regime. And what I would try to tell people is, for God's sake, all the well-intentioned engagements and discussions on the margin of the conference and new initiative and that initiative are completely useless, and they just elongate and legitimize an illegitimate regime. You're basically given a lifetime and tacitly endorsing a human right violator when you do that. To dramatize this, if Isaias Afwerki was a white man running the country, there would be a massive uprising in the world that there's a new slave master. He would not be tolerated. You would say there are 5 million people in this terrible white man who has a slave master mentality is enslaving them, so we must do something about it. If he was a classic bearded mullah enslaving people, there would be a bigger outrage. The problem is he doesn't fit the prototype dictator. And we all go to our Dictator for Dummies book and we say, no, he doesn't check this. He has a frugal lifestyle. He's got a Spartan lifestyle. He doesn't have a lavish lifestyle, and therefore he must not be all that bad. It's all exaggerated. But it's actually worse than what we're saying. And the reason we don't know that it's worse than what we're saying is it's because it's a closed society. So we've all been hoodwinked because he doesn't have villas in Europe, to our knowledge. He doesn't dress up in $1,000 brand suits, to our knowledge. He doesn't wear dark sunglasses, aviator glasses. He hasn't given himself the title of Field Marshal. So we just look at that and compare it to other horrible human beings and we say he can't be that bad. But let me be blunt. There is no government in Eritrea. Even to call it a regime implies a system, a structure, a hierarchy. But in actual fact, Eritrea is the state of Isaias Afwerki. It's a tyrannical police state. There's been a systematic subversion of state power by party, and even more intense subversion of party power by an individual. So now the state is the man, and the man is the sum total of all his mad contradictions. And this was done by creating a parallel infrastructure, illicit and informal. And because the members of this illicit and informal infrastructure are themselves rotated in and out of jail, their loyalty is to one man who happens to be the jail keeper, the president. Let me give you one simple example. Eritrea has a Ministry of Finance, Defense, Fisheries, Energy, Mining, Transportation, Trade, Industry, Agriculture. It has authorities like the Airline Authority, the Port Authority, the Shipping Authority. If you were to ask any of the ministers and directors to speak about the policy of their ministries and how they're executed, they could not string up a sentence. They would not have a clue, because all the power and authority that should reside in their ministries belong to the so-called government garages. And these government garages are led by a colonel who is nowhere in the government structure. Those who work in government garages call their institution Somaliland, because just like autonomous Somaliland, the garages are autonomous of the government structure. If you read the Somalia-Eritrea Monitoring Group report, it talks about how Isaias Afwerki spends most of his time in meetings dealing with the government garages, because they are a consolidation of all these governments that we're talking about, and they're run by one guy who reports directly to him. The rule of Isaias Afwerki is absolute. He controls the state media, the security apparatus, its army, its finance, its housing, its fuel supply. Let me pause here. When the Forto incident happened in January of this year, we were talking, the Forto incident is, there was an attempt, a short-lived attempt to overthrow the government by holding to the Ministry of Education and making an announcement. And one of the things that was talked about then is how these guys rolled their tanks and they came all the way from south of Eritrea to the city, and somebody who knew this said it can't happen because the government, the president controls fuel supply. They could not have had the fuel to go from the Eritrea-Ethiopia border to Asmara. So he decides which singers should go on which tours. Land distribution, potable water distribution, which pavements should be patched, what crops should the farmers sow, how far they should plow, which private hospitals should be closed, which ones should be open, which shopkeeper should be licensed, what curriculum should be taught at school, who should be sentenced for years and who for a life sentence, whose wife should be humiliated, whose wife should be abused so the husband feels utter humiliation. Did you hear me? Whose wife must be abused so the husband does not feel like a man anymore, because in our culture, that's the ultimate humiliation. He's the one who declares war and peace. So basically, a madman is in charge of our country. A paranoid, antisocial, narcissistic, sadistic man with schizophrenic tendencies, including aggressive grandiosity. How do you deal with a madman? You study his behavior. There's a pattern. And the pattern is he pretends big earth-shaking events like 360 citizens drowning in the Mediterranean is not happening. When he does feel a little bit of the impact, his reaction is to ridicule it, to make fun of it, to mock it. But when he's really cornered and there's no way out, he has absolutely no shame in making 180-degree turn and to yield. And therefore, we have really one objection: to make him feel intense pressure so that he makes a 180-degree turn. Change in Eritrea will come, and it will stick when enough Eritreans inside and outside the country believe it's necessary and it's timely. And if all the well-intentioned campaign of engagement, which is a door half ajar, will just keep prolonging things and elongating the rule of this man. You know, all of us need to reach a long overdue decision, the same one that was reached eventually about Saddam Hussein, about Muammar Gaddafi, about Bashar Assad, that this man happens to be head of state, but he's mentally unbalanced, and we need to recognize and legitimize alternatives to his sadistic life. We need to recognize and legitimize alternatives to his sadistic rule. Thank you.